Hey Wargamers, Games Workshop recently released Chapter Approved 2021 and also a big FAQ, which ideally means that there is tons of information to talk about for Tau. New points, new rules, a huge set of information that we have to go over. Well, ideally, yes, but not in actuality. So you may have heard there's actually very little in Chapter Approved or in the FAQ for us as Tau players. Now, I want to talk about the few things that we did get, of course, today, but I also want to take some time to talk about why we got so little, why we got essentially breadcrumbs compared to every other faction. So let's start off with the good news. The good news is that in the FAQ, they really clarified how remaining stationary works. They really gave it its own movement type and clarified a bunch of things about what counts as remaining stationary and what that means for you as a player. For Tau, this means that we have better clarity on how Monka works. So most Tau armies can do Monka once, but if you're in Commander Farsight, you can do Monka twice. This basically allows you to fall back out of combat and still shoot. So essentially the old fly mechanic from 8th edition, but for everyone within the bubble of Monka, twice per battle if you bring Commander Farsight, which, you know, in some ways, this is better, right? Because it applies to everyone, like Fire Warriors, for example, didn't used to be able to fall back and shoot using the fly keyword because they didn't have it. But with Monka, they can. And so there's value in that, particularly in a game that requires you to be in a place doing a thing with things like infantry, which Fire Warriors are. Things that have fly generally weren't, with the exception of stealth suits. So this is really valuable in that particular context. I know people have been playing it this way already, but there was a lot of confusion and ambiguity about it. So having it really nailed down, saying yes, 100%, this is how the rule works, fantastic. So that's certainly good news. That provides Tau players with not only a clear answer on something, but also a really valuable tool in terms of, you know, board control and objective control using Monka. So let's pivot to the not so great part. The great part of this video, but not the great part of the documents that we're discussing. So basically there are three things that that happened in Chapter Approved 2021 for Tau. Riptides went down by 1 point, so they're 260 points. That's what that little bit at the beginning was about. Shield generators for crisis suits went down to 5 points, so it's a 5-point drop. Hey, 50% off sale. That's great. And then hazard suits went down 5 points as well, but if we pair this with the FAQ, they now have to pay for support systems, just like crisis suits do. And so depending on the support system that you pick, you're actually paying more for a hazard suit than you used to. It makes sense, right? It was always kind of weird that they didn't have to pay for a support system. So I'm glad that they made this clarification, but they could have paired it with, like, I don't know, a 15-point drop in hazard suits to make up for it. But c'est la vie. Of course, this means that there's essentially no change in the point efficiency for any unit. You can look at my last video about the most efficient Tau choices for different targets. That's all the same, essentially, right? So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really have much impact at all. And honestly, it's disappointing, right? Like everyone else, I was hoping that there would be some substantial changes that really shook up the game for Tau in particular, and we didn't get those, right? It didn't happen. But I think there's a reason for that, aside from, apathy or anything like that on behalf of Games Workshop. I don't think it was a situation where Games Workshop looked at Tau and said, no, that's right, we want them right there. I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. I think it has more to do with some of the fundamental dysfunction of the faction that we've talked about in earlier videos. And so I think there's two things mostly going on here. One is dealing with savior protocols. We've discussed how savior protocols make things complicated to balance, and that's true. I still maintain that, right? Savior protocols, the ability for a drone to intercept a wound on, a vast diversity of units, is a really powerful tool for Tau, but it has inconsistent value. right? A drone intercepting a wound off a Riptide has different value to you or to the army than a drone intercepting a wound from a broadside or a crisis suit or even a character like a Fireblade, right? And so what this means is that there's actually a disconnect between the true durability of a unit, like a Riptide, and its price, right? The actual durability of a Riptide actually is not, 100% aligned with that unit's profile. It's inclusive of that profile, but the true durability of a Riptide incorporates Saber protocols as well. And because Saber protocols and drones are hard to price because of what we just talked about, it's hard to price a Riptide too, right? It's hard to price any given unit that benefits from Saber protocols because of how Saber protocols so strongly influence the durability of that unit. If Tau units didn't have Saber protocols, it'd be much easier, much more straightforward to price any given one, right? You could just look at its profile and say, okay, this is how durable it is. But there's so many, contingencies on how durable any given unit is that it becomes much more challenging to actually point them appropriately. So we have this overarching issue of dealing with Saber protocols. And I think there's a part of the design team that said, this is really broken and we need a new codex to fix it. So let's just wait for a new codex before we just start throwing numbers around. And so with that in mind, I think this is another signal in some ways that Saber protocols or some of the core mechanics of the Tau Empire will not be returning in their present state in the next codex, right? There's going to be some pretty big changes. I think the lack of movement that we saw here in Chapter Approved is consistent with that. The other big thing I think is that's influencing this lack of mobility in Tau is the fact that they are a shooting army, right? They're a shooting army with relatively, weak durability, with a few exceptions, right? If we're looking at Fire Warriors, for example, they're not the sturdiest infantry out there, right? And so if we were to point them just based on their durability, which again is really important in 9th edition. In 9th edition, your durability is almost as important or maybe more important than your offensive capability because 9th edition, again, is about being in the place and doing the thing, not about just killing all the other units. So that dichotomy between having actually pretty weak profiles and high-powered weaponry generally means that there's not a ton of wiggle room on the points for individual units. Again, consider the fact that Saber protocols have a massive influence on the durability of a unit, making this much more confounded. But if we're just talking about individual units, there's not a ton of room to, make Fire Warriors 4 points apiece, right? That would be insane. That maybe would be appropriate just given their durability, but it's not appropriate given their offensive capabilities. And that's true for a vast majority of units in the Tau Empire Codex. Looking at crisis suits, we couldn't have 15-point crisis suits, right? That would be too good. But maybe that would be appropriate given how easily you can remove a single crisis suits in the absence of Saber protocols. And so that push and pull between the fact that Tau can shoot pretty well and their relatively low durability means that there probably would need to be pretty significant point reductions in order to compensate for their lack of durability in 9th edition. But the issues with Saber protocols, the issues with their offensive capabilities at a range make those problematic in terms of general balance. So I think these two big things, dealing with the true durability of units and balancing that against their offensive capabilities, is really challenging and again requires a rework from the ground up for the codex. And so hopefully Games Workshop prioritizes that in terms of getting a Tau codex out sooner rather than later. But we don't know, right? This doesn't suggest that a new codex is coming anytime soon. It just means that Games Workshop is as stumped as we are in a lot of ways about what to do with the army. And so I hope that they prioritize this. Hopefully we get this in the next, 5 codex releases. There's a Tau entry in there somewhere, but I don't know, right? No one knows. Well, someone knows. They're just not standing in front of this camera. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you really disappointed with this, or are you happy that we got this clarification on Monka? Let me know. And of course, as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This channel is made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Really, the support means more to me than you realize. So special thanks to Tau Oswell, Stephen Cowan, Jared Egler, Scott Heater, Michael Byrne, Robbie Goodwin, Chris Kessler, Durza, Zealous Brimstone, Ever Keller, Drew Pralley, Ruger, Jose Gomez, A Little Pink Monster, and Benaby Jones.